Recently, the Nobel Prize in Economics has been given to Claudia Goldin for her research in women workforce in the labor market, and based on that, the reasons behind the gender gap and the gaps in earning was more discussed in it. So hello and welcome to NewsKase. This is Shubham Dubey, the faculty for economics at Kalam IAS Academy, and today I'll be talking about the Nobel Prize in Economics. In 2023, the Nobel Prize has been given to Claudia Goldin, who is an eminent professor at Harvard University, and you will be surprised to know that she was the first woman who was admitted to Harvard University. She is an American economist, and certain key components let's discuss today. Claudia Goldin, a name, very well-known name nowadays, because recently she has been awarded the Nobel Prize, and she gave the historical perspective on the differences in the rates of employment as well as the wages between men and women. A study that is which has advanced our understanding of women labor in the market outcome, that has shown better results and given better perspective to understand whether the participation was more or low and what are the major key drivers of this particular incident. So let's discuss this. How the marriage, parenthood and the pill, that contraceptive pill, has impacted the women in the workforce, that we'll be discussing today. In the overall research, she made some path-breaking research, and that showed that how the role of women has been concentrated in household works rather than coming into the workforce post-industrialization. And with the advent of the service sector, it has improved. And we'll be discussing it through certain diagrams and pictures which she has also shared in her research, and that will make you understand it properly. See the picture where she had showed that the growth of women workforce with overall growth in the economy was U-shaped, not consistently increasing. And in that aspect, what she said, in the 1790s, almost the 19th and 20th century time period, the woman was largely in the agricultural part, and her participation was more at that time. If we see, this shows the married work woman percentage, and here it talks about by the passing years, what changes has come forward in the women's participation. In this perspective, if we see, the data is almost of 200 years, and this was first such comprehensive data which has given a broader picture of women's participation in US mainly, but it can also be seen in other economies at the same time, because the 2-year data has been largely taken from US. Now if we see this parameter, so we can see in the agrarian society, the larger proportion of women was into the consideration, and they were ranging in between 50% at that time. So the participation of barren women at the time of when the agriculture society was the prime source of income, it was around 50%. But with the starting of the 19th century, the industrialization, which paved the way for growth, but started declining the role of women in the workforce. Here we see the percentage of women has reached to a very least number, that was around 8 to 10%. And the major cause for married women was because the rapid industrialization has helped in more industries, more factories at the same time, and the women, due to household activities and home duties, were not able to travel more for work. And because of that, they were left behind largely. With passage of time, this situation was still 1900, and post this, with the coming of service sector society and also with the changing pattern in the expectation aspect, in the expanding education aspects, has led to change the mindset of the society to an extent, and also women at the same time. This has changed the scenario to a larger extent, where percentage of women has started increasing and almost reached nearby the 45 to 50% again with the passage of time. And meanwhile, the year 1970 was very crucial. It was the revolutionary period for women because women were coming out with more freedom and more job opportunities because they have largely understood the role of employment and education. And that too, women were more involved into the higher education aspect in the high income countries. With all these segments, the contraceptive pills at that time, that is the birth control pill, became cheaper and easier to take. And this has changed two key decisions of women. One was the marriage aspect, that married women were aspect, and another was delaying the process of childbirth. With both these processes, they started giving more priority to their career pathways, the future aspect of their career, and given a bit delay, which has made their condition bit important in the segment. So this U-shaped recovery showed a better picture where with the consistent growth in the different economies of the world and especially in the US, this has not resulted in reducing the unemployment or employment gap within the gender scenario. The gap between male and female was largely wider, and that has shown initially it has decreases to an extent and then it has increased to an extent with the service sector aspect. So this picture she has used to showcase how married women were largely underrepresented, at the same time were excluded from the process of the employment and the career opportunities aspect. And even there were certain surprising things. If there are 20% women in the workforce, only 5% married women were there in that. So the scenario, not just in a country like India, which is largely patriarchal in nature, the countries like US and many modern Western world has seen this aspect, where the role of women has been reduced to just household activities and duties to a larger extent. The key highlights from this research shows the key drivers of gender differences in the labor market. What were the major key drivers behind it? The first comprehensive account of women's earnings and labor market participation through the centuries, that was another important part of this research. And the historical perspective, where the older data has paved better results, have shown better prospect of women participation and the gaps in their earnings and employment at the same time. In this, the archives of 200 years of data of US has been collected and showed that the economic growth which ensured in varied periods did not translate to reducing differences in the labor market. That means the gender difference tha within the labor market, that was at the higher side. That has not come down, either reduced. And the reason which largely influenced her participation during that time period are the opportunities for combining the paid work and family work at the same time, the decisions and expectations related to pursuing the career, education, raising the children, technical innovations, law and norms, and the structural transformation in an economy has affected the role of women and the participation of women to a larger extent. Post this, certain key takeaways from the entire Nobel Prize in economics perspective, because this is very important for you to understand, and this is not just limited to US, because the larger proportion, larger chunk of data is from US only, but it can be seen in any country with certain recommendations and certain analysis. The impact of marriage on women employment, the legislation that is termed as marriage bars has often prevented the women to pursue further or to continue their careers as teachers, officers, they largely left because of coming family duties and household duties. And that has led to change their role, and which has reduced largely and made them underrepresented. Apart from it, the women's expectations were largely based on the mother's experience. Per se, if there is a woman, whatever she has seen with her mother's experience from her childhood to her younger age, she will be having the same expectation because she is knowing the status of her mother in the family at the same time. And meanwhile, her expectations related to career, related to education, were not longer. The larger initiative was to get into an institution of marriage and then get excluded from the labor force. And this has been largely seen in the industrialization era, when the role of women has largely been excluded due to the disproportionate burden they had to take. And with all this context, the role of women shrinked largely, and in the marriage buds, they were stuck down. Post this, in 1960s or 70s, we can say, with the changing nature of the society, because first we were agrarian, then largely the world shifted to the industrialization, and post-industrialization, once the world shifted to the services, the women got chances at the same time. The situation got changed, and the scenarios of women empowerment, freedom for women has caught up the more ignition, and at the same time, the role of contraceptive pills has become more prominent, because by that time it has become easier to take such pills for birth control. This research has also shown one thing, that in the initial year of marriage, the male and female are going on the same path with very less discrimination. The less discrimination is in the wages. Likewise, if a male is getting $1 for the work, for the same work, the female is getting only 80 cents. That has been the larger part of this research. So there was some small things. Then, with the first child birth, the man's career path was still straight, but for female it started degrading. Because just after the birth, she will not be able to take work again. So for that part, for some time she will not be available to work, and she wasn't usually. And with that aspect, when she came back to work even, she was not even being paid the same. She was not even being given the same position, not she was even being given the same promotion or respect at the same time. And this has also reduced their status in the society. So 1960s has largely been an important year, because this was the year when the revolution has taken place. The revolutionary part has discussed a lot of things related to women and their aspect. Then women by that time entered in the field of economics, law and medicine and other fields also, and they have given more preferences to work. And with that part, the proportion of women which was largely reducing has increased with this U-shaped curve, which largely represent the participation of women in 2 centuries almost, from 1790 to 1990. But at the same time, certain key important thing is that there is still the pay gap and parenthood aspect, where the first child context, which I have just discussed, is there. In the pay gap, if we see largely for contractual work, the wages difference is more per hour, and when we see if there is a monthly contract, it gets wider. Although in the initial years it is not much difference, but with the first child, the same path, the man is going on this path and the female path of growth becomes narrowed down or go downwards. Now connect it with the Indian context. Largely, the marriage bar is the prime thing in the Indian context or Indian society, where just after marriage the women are largely being taken to give the birth to their child, and post that the career options or career opportunities to them stuck down like anything, which is somewhat changing in Indian society perspective these days, but at the same time all this is happening in the Indian perspective also. Then the status of labor force in world and India. And before that, the key points you understood from her research were largely the role of marriage, how it has impacted the working woman or married women to participate in the workforce. Also, what was the market outcome related to women labor force, and also how this scenario has changed in US and many countries with the coming of service sector. Now we'll be talking about the status of female workforce in world and India. As per World Bank report, there is female labor force participation rate that is around 50% as compared to male that is around 80%. And apart from it, the women are less likely to work in formal employment because major opportunities are being missed or are not being given to women in the formal sector. There is male dominance in the formal sector as well, and have fewer opportunities for business expansion and career progression. Even the class ceiling effect, women are being promoted to an extent, post that those things are beyond their limit as per the pro society part. And in India, it is much lower than the world participation rate. Why? We can see that the recent survey shows the female labor force participation rate is at 37%. Though government says we have significantly improved from 23% to 37%, but certain world data says India has around 25% female labor force participation. So there are differences, but let's see what's good in this and what's serious concern from this. So the good thing is that the government itself applauds the women-led agenda of the government policies and initiatives, which has led to the improvement in the female labor force participation. The second part of it is that we can see this female labor force participation with the usual status. Now, what is usual status? That we have discussed in the NewsKase series of employment in India. And in the unemployment in India, I told you the reference period is of a year, that is 365 days. If the major part of the year one is having work around 6 months or some few months, then he will be termed as employed. And based on that, the female labor force participation is around 37%. And in the 17-18, it was around 23%. So this is a small basic difference between both. But at the same time, if you see, this has been increasing even in the COVID period. The 2021 and 21-22. This was largely the pandemic period, but still it has been very small improvement, that was around 0.3%. But post that it has increased. So now we need to know what are the major causes. This has also shown that the improvement is more in the rural India than urban India. And with the rural India aspect, if we see, the improvement is more because the reverse migration which has happened during the COVID time period has exposed the economic distress within the rural society. And because of that, many low-skilled women have come out to work under MG Narega and other government initiatives, and largely MG Narega, which has given a steady rise to it, and that has shown a good improvement in the female labor force participation. Along with it, The other part of discussion is why the female labor force participation is low in India. The data is just quantitative. What about the qualitative part? Whether the quality jobs where enough remuneration is being provided to women or not is a big question. So let's see what are the major reasons related to it. The context of societal and cultural influence. We have talked about marriage bar. Can we say marriage bar is one of that thing? We can also say the context related to larger proportion of women are the meta preference, the male dominated society, the patriarchal society effect, and largely the women are out of the process of human development or human capital development because they are largely relying on the traditional subjects of humanities. Apart from it, the disproportionate burden on women, large informal global care chain, and we have discussed about it, that the disproportionate burden where women have to give 5 to 6 hours daily in the household activities, in the child care, elderly care and other stuff has diminished their role in the paid economy part or in the monetized economy segment because the larger proportion of time they are devoting in the household activities or care activities. Then pose this, the gender disparity in land ownership, and the most important key component about it, around 70% of the land holdings are with male heirs. And this has also changed the scenario to a larger extent. When they don't have the property rights, when they don't have the right to make their own choices, make their own decisions, and to stick with their career opportunities or the career progression they want to. So how we can expect that there will be a better female labor force? The gender wage gap that we have discussed in the case of US, $1 to 80 cents. In the case of India, the situation is more or less. For say in India, if a man is getting 1 rupees, might be a female is just getting 60 paisa. That is another problem. The unpaid domestic and care work, it is not just devotion of the work, the time they devote to that work. It is more about this is largely unpaid or underpaid at the same time. Then the urban and rural disparities which we have seen. First thing is the opportunities itself, then the societal pressure which leads to make the disparity to get wider. And then the unpaid family helper. In the rural areas specifically, the woman is helping in the farms and having zero productivity or zero marginal cost of it. So these are certain regions. Because of that, the female labor force participation is low, and there are many more reasons. These were certain specific reasons which you need to mention and you need to know at the same time. Post this, what can be done to improve the female labor force participation? The one thing is the policy reform, which is very much required. Making gender inclusive policy will give them recognition, will empower the women. Then the skilling and educational training will do the value addition part in the women's aspect and their career prospect at the same time. The self-help groups will empower the women to do their entrepreneurship opportunities of their own. Some entrepreneurial skill are there and they can better utilize that. Equal pay for equal work, this DPSP needs to be backed by some legislation so that women can be paid equally as compared to men. And the maternity benefit and child care benefits which are being given by the government but are not being insured in the many corporates, many companies that needs to be insured from the government side, and certain key safety features needs to be required. And post all this 5R framework of ILO will recognize their work, then reducing the disproportionate burden, redistributing the work between the families, regulating the efforts and representing their cells so that better prospect can be created. So all these segments, let's sum up things. Let's understand how this can be important from your exams perspective now. And the part is the Nobel Prize in Economics 2023, which has been awarded to Claudia Goldin for her research on having advanced our understanding of women's labor market outcomes. In this segment, the segment has been taken from the large newspapers, and then this is important from the perspective of GS paper 3, GS paper 2, GS paper 1 and essay, because this role of women is important from different perspectives. The comprehensive understanding of topic, I hope you have done that now. And the question like this can come forward, which has just come in the UPSC 2023 mains, which was related to care economy and monetized economy aspect, and how this care economy can be brought into monetized economy through women empowerment. And certain key takeaways from the research which we have just discussed, the important terminologies and analysis which can be better required from here. So with all these aspects, this Nobel Prize is very important and very crucial from understanding point of view as well as from the point of view of your UPSC mains examination. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be discussing another segment in the NewsKase on our YouTube platform at Kalam IAS Academy. Thank you.